Kathy, I love all the toys in your bookcase behind there.
I know. That's because I'm not seeing patients here.
Yeah. See, in my mind, I'm like, she's already like applying her genius to a whole new test, you know, and she's like testing it out behind her.
Oh, yeah.
You still have mini shoes. I remember that from when you were here. Do you still collect mini shoes?
I do.
Aw. I remember your collection.
Oh my gosh. Well, hi everybody. We're gonna give it like another minute. Just let people make sure they are getting logged in and stuff. We're getting close. We'll start in 1 minute. But yeah, people have mentioned like here, like Steve, your office looks so much more bare and boring compared to when Kathy was here. So maybe I should like collect some shoes or something and put them up here.
All right. Well, we were also constantly scrambling because I was always finding out I was breaking rules.
Right.
Like, oh my gosh, no wood.
Wait.
Paper.
You, Kathy Lord, breaking rules? What?
Oh. Oh, Melanie knows. Driving around all our cars filled with the wooden puzzles.
Oh my God. The stories you could probably tell.
Yes.
Yeah, seriously, you should like think about a book to write, like behind the scenes of autism or something afterwards. Both of you too should do that. So. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. We're about 4 minutes after. So hi, everybody. Welcome to our February idea phone call. We changed the format quite a bit for today. It's so funny. I'm like, oh, how am I going to introduce Allison and Kathy? I'm like, well, I don't have to. Everyone knows who you are. You know, the mark of fame in today's world is, do you have your own Wikipedia page? And you both do. So it's like, I don't have that. So it's like, if anyone wants to know the background of either Allison or Kathy, feel free to just Google them and you'll have pages upon pages upon pages of stuff to read about both of them. But honestly, I'm incredibly honored that they took the time out of their incredibly busy schedules to do this. They're both thought leaders in the field and have made a huge impact in so many ways, and in my career in particular, actually, as well. So I want to at least share real quick my screen to show you. This is what prompted today's talk. This is the article that came out about a month or two ago, I guess, and you can see all of the authors on there, of which Kathy and Allison are them. And it really did prompt for me, you know, I actually read all 55 pages of it, and like figures are gorgeous, but there's so much good stuff in there. And one of the kernels in there is this notion of profound autism and the label. And as everyone has talked about on this listserv, it's already evoked a lot of discussion, a lot of even one might say controversy in the field. So appreciate, like I'm thinking, let's just hear it from them themselves. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to Kathy and Alison. I'll turn my screen off too, so my picture, so everyone's not distracted, but feel free to take it away, Kathy and Allison.
Okay. So I'm going to talk first, and Allison is going to provide color commentary. Allison, jump in whenever you want.
Okay.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's wonderful to see Steve and Melanie and Allison. And I know a bunch of you out there. This is just to show you the list, which Steve just very politely showed you, of all the people on the Lancet Commission. And I think one of the important things, which I think most of you know, is this was a group where I was invited to chair this. Tony Charman volunteered to co-chair, and we were asked to put together an international committee that reflected different disciplines and different perspectives. And we did this. We cooked up who we wanted to invite, and then Lancet also added people or said, oh, you need more people like this, or you've got too many people like this. So we met 3 times in person, including having 2 little conferences on international approaches to autism. And basically the committees, we broke into committees who outlined sections, presented the outlines, we discussed possible recommendations. We reviewed, everybody reviewed everything. We then had 3 formal reviewers, Peter Zatmari, Pat Howland, and James Cusack. And then they did such a beautiful job. They came and presented to us that we invited them to be authors. We did another revision. And then for any of you who've ever worked with Lancet, we did about 6 more editorial revisions as they changed my grammar and my American spelling. And then this was launched in December. It's available online. Hard copies will be available in spring, and I don't know how we will distribute them, but they have promised me that they will exist. And then I have also promised to do a plain language version whenever I get my current grant proposals in. So we had members from 6 continents. We really tried to take the international mandate seriously. We had 13 different disciplines represented and 32 people, including several people with autism and several parents of autistic people. And I think the very first thing we decided, which is sort of ironic, given right now, I don't know if you saw that Tom Insel has now decided that our doc wasn't so wonderful. I can't believe it. But we decided that one of the first points is urgency. We need to do something to directly address the ways that we can improve the lives of the 78 million autistic people in this world and their family, and not at all to negate the importance of neuroscience or basic biology, but just to say we shouldn't ignore who's here. I think related to that point was the idea that we do have a lot of evidence and scientific data that we can use. Particularly if we could focus it a little bit more on actual immediate issues, such as what strategies and interventions and support systems benefit whom, when, and with what intensity, as well as how, which is what NIMH has been very focused on. And I think many of you, I think, are clinicians, and you know that we're constantly faced with a family who says, does my child need 40 hours of ABA? That's what Lovas said. Or my child is getting half an hour a week of speech pathology. Is that worth anything? And those are the questions that we don't have answers for. I think we want to acknowledge, this is preaching to the choir, that autism is neurobiological, that we do need basic science, but that the clinical challenges for autism that autism raises for society and for autistic people and families are not probably going to be solved by biomedical solutions for most people in the near future. There are some exceptions which are wonderful, but it's not most people. So our group decided we were going to focus on recommendations that can be put into effect in the next 5 years and that could actually have an immediate outcome. And so we were targeting research that could change lives now and then had immediate effects on quality of life for autistic people and their families. And that is probably the main theme here. Other things such as profound autism are highlighted a lot, but this is what we're trying to say. And it is ironic that that's what Tom Insel, front page of the New York Times said yesterday, even though he is really, for totally good intentions, he is part of the reason why now at NIMH you have to have a biological mechanism in order to get funded. I think backing up a little bit, one of the places we came from, which again is just preaching to the choir, is that autism is different between individuals. There are huge differences, particularly in adulthood, but even as you move into middle childhood and adolescence, between people who have the potential to be independent, but may really struggle with all kinds of things, and other people who need different kinds of support, but are also capable of happy lives. And we're also conscious that autism is a developmental condition, and a child may really benefit from ABA when they're 3, but that same child when they're 15 is probably not going to benefit from a discrete trial in the same way. So we want to recognize that autistic people are people. They're children, and then they're adolescents, and they're adults, and these are all different things, and they need different kinds of support at different times. We also do want to recognize that there is value to neurodiversity, and that recognizing that different people need different things and can offer different things to us is very important. And this is really across the range, for example, of intellectual development. So I think we wanted to add a priority for large-scale research, with immediate implications to funding agencies. Because the reality is that most intervention studies right now are done by people who've spent their lives creating these interventions. This is such hard work and getting funded for it. And so their goal when they're studying their intervention is to show that their intervention works. And so the general gist, not everybody, is to compare your intervention to the least effective intervention you can find so that you get the greatest difference. Now, there are exceptions to this. So Connie Kassery worked for a long time with Tris Smith, comparing ABA and Jasper, although that's not published in general. Other people have looked at, Sally Rogers compared a high intensity to a slightly less high intensity ESDM. So people are trying, but most of the time it's not possible with the size of a current grant, at least in the US, to do a good job of this. We need something bigger, and we need to move beyond the investigator who is very invested in their intervention, being completely in charge of studying their intervention. We also need to consider cultural appropriateness and the fact that most of these interventions are created for white, upper middle class people who have parents with a lot of time or a nanny. And this is different than most of the world and a lot of the world in the US. And so we need to be able to consider that, but we don't want to start there. We want to start with what we already know and then use that information to figure out what can work in communities with fewer resources. We also want to remember that this isn't just about autism. We've learned a lot of things that are relevant to kids with significant communication disorders or intellectual disabilities, and we don't want to completely exclude those kids or adults from what we're doing. So one of the things we proposed is this idea of a stepped care personalized health model. And several people have said to me since this is out, you're really talking about person-centered approaches, which is absolutely true. But we wanted to recognize that it's not just the person, it's the family. We also want to bring the perspective that generally when people in public health talk about step care, they're talking about let's not spend too much money, let's not waste resources, for example, hospital resources. And so let's do this as cheaply as possible. And our point was it shouldn't just be financial for the health system, it should consider the burden and cost to the families and the preferences, because if people are participating in research that they, not research, in clinical work that they want to be part of, they are going to benefit a lot more than if they're forced into something that they don't want. And I think examples there are, we can see with telehealth. Some people love telehealth and would like to be on telehealth forever. And other people do not want to be on telehealth. Some people want to find medications and find huge relief in the benefits of medication. Other people want nothing to do with medication. And we need to consider those preferences when we're thinking about developing treatment plans. I should say also that our Lancet group was very focused on interventions and support and systems. So less assessment, even though you guys know I'm an assessment person, I'm always trying to figure out for the families that I work with, what are we going to do now? So the point of the step care model, though, is that if we're going to do things in steps that emphasize families' strengths, their needs and their challenges, we need to know which interventions and which kinds of support work for those particular needs, strengths, and challenges. And we need to update this as kids get older, and particularly we need information for adults. And I think this is important, not just in the US, but some of the countries that have some of the very best support programs do one assessment. You get labeled as autism, and that's your assessment for the rest of your life. And the point is that people change. People with autism grow up. So this is just to give you an example. And I'm just going to walk through really fast what this is. So basically along the left side, the idea is if we had a minimally verbal 5-year-old who is in a low resource country, we want to think before we start, what do we need to know about this child in terms of diagnosis? What are the priorities for the family for this child? And define what are we going to try to accomplish? And then in order to do this, let's see if this will work. We're going to consider the fact that this is a 5-year-old and maybe this child isn't in school yet, which is quite significant in terms of where he's spending his day. Maybe this child has very limited adaptive functioning and is not yet toilet trained. So that is going to be a high priority. Maybe the child is functioning more like a 2-year-old in terms of language understanding than a 5-year-old. And maybe his family doesn't realize that, even though they know that he doesn't talk. And safety is going to be a very big issue if this child easily wanders off. Maybe this child at this point is spending all his time at home. So we need to consider that. And these parents are very motivated to participate. They really want to know, how do we help our child? So we're going to consider what makes the most sense for them, because they do not have a lot of resources. And ideally, we would have a home-based program that can be based around the personal schedule. Maybe the parents both work and the child is spending the day with the grandparents. Is there a way to get him into school? How can we do this? Just to contrast this, and I know I'm really rushing through it, we say we have a 15-year-old girl who is in a high-income country, has potentially lots of resources, but is overwhelmed with social anxiety as well as autism. So the priority is this girl is asking for help. She is terrified. She doesn't want to go to school. She feels really bad about herself. She is beginning to move into depression, and we want to see how we can help her. So her individual factors are going to be different. She's a teenager. She is cognitively at age level in many skills. She is so overwhelmed with anxiety that it affects her social skills. She understands quite a lot, although she doesn't always use what she understands, which is true of most teenagers. And she's having a particularly rough time at school. And she's having no interactions with kids outside of school. Maybe she is a really talented artist and she spends hours drawing beautiful anime. So that is a strength that we can build on. So one issue here is, would medication help her reduce her anxiety and allow her to participate in other activities? She is very motivated. Her parents aren't sure. They just feel like making a big deal out of this might make things worse. And so we consider over here, what can we do? Can her parents get her to something like a social group? Can she get medication? And what medication and how is it going to help her? The caregivers are interested in this, although they are not so sure. And so that needs to be a major focus of figuring out what will they do to help her and what do they think about this? Okay. All right. So I think that we just want to recognize, and this is a big empty slide, because 95% of kids under the age of 5 with developmental disabilities live in lower or moderate income countries and have almost no services. I think a point raised by Paul Shattuck, who is more interested in services for more verbal people, is that most service systems were not designed, at least in the US, and I think this is true to some degree in other countries, to meet the specific needs of autistic individuals and are underfunded. And his point is that people with autism are often going to be lifelong service users, as are their parents, who are working to get their kids the most services and the most appropriate services. And we need to remember that there are real service deserts. And I think just an example is we're working right now with a 40-year-old man with autism. He was in special ed from 2nd grade on, but his parents really moved him. Whenever something got tough, they would literally move schools. So he has very little education, although very high verbal. And he's 40. So he's too old for like peers groups. And we're trying to get him a job, and he is trying his best. But I think we've interviewed probably 40 job interviews in the last few months for him. And we've been waiting for the regional center here to kick in. It's been waiting 9 months. He had his first appointment yesterday, but he is in a high income area. He's not particularly wealthy, but there is a service desert for 40-year-olds. So I want to introduce the concept of profound autism, and then Allison's going to provide comments. But we're concerned as a committee that people who have very significant needs, really for 24-hour care, it doesn't mean they have to have someone walking by their side for 24 hours, but they need somebody available to help them. And that often these people get pushed by the wayside. And actually, I just listened to a talk by a woman who is a disabilities expert, not autism, who was, I think, Assistant Secretary of, I don't know, Health for Clinton, who just kept talking about full integration. Everyone should be in a regular class. I just could not believe it. And everyone should have paid employment. And I was like, who have you been around recently? So our point is these people that have more severe needs, first of all, can have happy lives. We can make their lives better, but they can't speak for themselves. And they are going to need extensive care throughout their lives. It's not a matter of just putting them into a 16-week group and everything is going to be great. They have particular needs. And so we decided to define this group. And this was really a practical decision by having an IQ under 50 or having very limited language. So single words or rote phrases, not being able to communicate basic needs to a stranger verbally. Now, people in this group can have more complex co-occurring difficulties. They're more likely to have epilepsy or self-injury or aggression, but not all of them do. And those things do occur in other people. We also, and I'll just show you some data in a second, we don't feel like this is a category that should be brought up when children are very little. I don't think you can tell who's going to fall in this group at age 2. But beginning in mid-childhood, somewhere between 8 and 12, it turns out that this is quite a stable diagnosis. And I'll show you the data in a second. What we really want to do is spur the clinical and research communities to prioritize the needs of this vulnerable, underserved group, not to forget everybody else, but just to remember they exist. So we looked at 3 samples, and this is the MOBA sample. So Alex Havdal from Norway was able to get us access to this sample, which is it's a true epidemiological sample of 100,000 births. The point here is that in MOBA, and these are followed up, I think, to about between age 10 and 20, and then looked at registries. About, I think it's 18% of the kids with autism fell into this group. So not most of them. I think what was striking, though, was that the proportion of kids in this group who were female was much higher than the proportion in non-profound autism. In SNAP, which is a representative sample from London, so more population-based, 22% of the people with autism fell into profound autism. And then EDX, which some of you know is our longitudinal study, it was 48%. And EDX is based on on adults who were referred for autism at age 2, and this was done 30 years ago. So that's why it's so high. But one of the reasons we left this number in, because I don't think it's reflective of the US, is that it's probably more reflective of other countries, particularly low to moderate income countries, where most of the people that are getting services for autism have limited verbal skills. And then I just wanted you to see, we looked at the stability over time of kids who fell into this category. And this is either an IQ below 50 or very limited language. And what we found in the SNAP sample, going from age 15 up to 25, that 83% of the people that were in the sample at age 15 stayed in, and the ones who moved out, actually what happened was their IQs went from 50 to 54. In early diagnosis, we could find that predicting adult status in terms of profound autism, we could do this at age 5 with 86% accuracy, and at age 9 by 92%. And you guys know nothing is ever perfect. So this is really, it really is quite stable. Now, one more point, and then I'll let Alison talk. I think the point of this is an administrative term. We don't want people to forget these kids. We are not making a new diagnosis. And I think we've started discussions with the DSM and APA. And what's likely to happen is that this is going to change. I think probably everybody knows that those levels of severity are pretty terrible. And we hope that this could come in as one of the levels of severity. Okay, Alison, I'm gonna stop. And
Okay,
well, actually, yeah, let me, you know what I'll do, sorry. This is my ending, so I might as well make it, and then you can take over. So in the end, I think what we want to end with is the idea that good things can happen to anybody with autism if we know what we're doing and we get support. So I think that we are trying to have a message of hope, but then to get going, we can't just wait till everybody has a genetic label and then wait while someone figures out if they can do something. And even then, what on earth is that going to be? The point of this slide, which Andrew Pickles made, is that if we move up the level of opportunity with these red lines here, we move up people's potential for more independence and for more adaptive skills. And this may not be perfect, but if somebody can brush their own teeth, if somebody can choose their own clothes, if somebody can make their own sandwich, or if somebody can have a job or live in their own apartment, all of these things will be better if we increase the level of opportunity. But we can do this systematically and not just more money at everything if we better use our research designs to focus on this. So I'm going to stop, and Alison, it's all yours.
Can I interrupt us for 1 second? I neglected, my apologies. I neglected one of my duties as a host. We disabled chat. If folks have questions along the way after Kathy or Alison speak, feel free to type it into the Q&A. We'll look them over and pass them on. So sorry to interrupt. I just want to say, type your questions in the Q&A.
Should I, Alison, should I close this, or should I go back to the?
No, you can close it.
Okay.
Or you can leave that, whatever you want. We can close it.
Okay.
Okay, so thanks, Kathy. You did a wonderful job, I think, explaining profound autism. And really, I think the commissioner's goal in creating that term was really to speak to what Kathy described as the tremendous heterogeneity, and the fact that one cohort, the individuals who had the most severe symptoms, were really being left behind. And when you think back to 2013, when the DSM-5 came out, it's so ironic that this happened, because if you do think back, we were so concerned about the individuals with Asperger's. When the term Asperger's left the DSM, the CDC and lots of groups did studies looking at the new diagnostic criteria, and we were worried, would people who had previously been diagnosed with Asperger's retain the diagnosis? Would they be left to have no diagnosis and no access to services? And what was their plight going to be under the new DSM criteria? And as it turns out, I would argue that that concern was misplaced. The group that was left behind and most harmed by the change was those on the profound end of the autism spectrum. With DSM-5, everyone was diagnosed autism spectrum disorder. And although the severity categories were designed to provide more information about the types of services and the level of functioning, the truth of the matter is that almost no one used those levels of severity, and everyone was just diagnosed autism spectrum disorder. So you had people who had genius IQ and people who had intellectual disability and IQ of below 50 diagnosed the same, autism spectrum disorder. You had people who had graduated from Harvard Law School, and like my daughter, who exited high school with a certificate of attendance, diagnosed the same autism spectrum disorder. You had people whose social disability revolved around them having difficulty, as Ami Klin likes to say, navigating the social sphere of the middle school cafeteria. And then you had, again, people like my daughter who have aggressive behaviors, self-injurious behaviors, really very antisocial behavior that made it very difficult for her to remain in any sort of mainstream environment or even in public school. And then what we also saw was, as Kathy started to point out, at the federal level, at the state level, at the policymaking table, there was a move to include people who were actually diagnosed with disability as opposed to people who represented those who were diagnosed with disability. So in the autism world, people who were diagnosed autism spectrum disorder, who could go to Washington, who could argue for certain types of advocacy policy initiatives, who could speak for themselves, who were able to participate, were the ones who were included at the policymaking table. And those of us who had children with significant IQ, who were not able to, I mean, my daughter could never attend an IAC meeting or sit still at a meeting for 30 minutes. So she was excluded. So we only got the points of view of people who had very high skills. And unfortunately, their advocacy in many ways did not include the needs of those with profound autism. I think Kathy was very clear in pointing out that the commissioner's goals here was not to say that one group of people had more needs or should have their needs met or shouldn't have their needs met. It's simply to say that their needs are different, and that when you are planning for housing and day program and activities and employment opportunities for people with autism, the needs of someone who would be characterized as having profound autism are very, very different from how you would plan to meet the needs of someone who was higher functioning, who maybe needed support in order to achieve competitive employment versus someone for whom competitive employment is not even on the table. And I'll give an example of some policymaking issues that we confront. This one happened yesterday, and I think this really, there's been no clearer dichotomy to me than this example yesterday. I was on a call with the Department of Education, and someone very high up in special education at the Department of Ed actually said, and I wrote it down, she said, "The pandemic and remote learning have been positive for students with autism who report a decline in bullying."
Oh, God.
Okay, let me say that again. The pandemic and remote learning have been positive for students with autism because they report a decline in bullying.
Oh, my God.
I could conceive of a group of individuals with autism for whom that might be true. I think it would be a small group, but I do think that you could probably conceive of a group of very high functioning individuals with autism who were overwhelmed by the social issues of being in a school building, for whom remote learning offered an opportunity to engage in learning activities and not experiencing the bullying that maybe they experience in the cafeteria. In order to be part of that group, you'd probably have to have an extremely high IQ so that you could access material remotely. You would have to have exceptional receptive language skills, exceptional expressive language skills, and you would also have to have significant executive functioning skills in order to be able to be on a Zoom all day long. This is anecdotal data, but we have heard from hundreds of parents over the course of the pandemic who have reported that remote learning has been a disaster for their kids who not only have autism, but a wide variety of special needs. These kids cannot attend. They desperately need the one-to-one special education teacher or paraprofessional helping them to stay on task, to focus. They need to learn in different types of ways, in different chunks, shorter periods of time. And for them, remote learning has not only not been positive, but has been a huge disaster. And then finally, I would say that bullying is not the outcome that most people with profound autism or their parents would measure as the core outcome. In fact, you could make the argument that at the very profound end of the spectrum, our kids really don't experience as much bullying, because in many ways, our kids who would be bullies are not targeting our kids because they're not going to get a response from our kids who really don't even, in many cases, understand bullying. So I think the goal, as Kathy said, of having the term profound autism and using the term profound autism is so we can create different pathways with our policy so that it's not a one size fits all. It's not that, again, everyone who's diagnosed autism spectrum disorder gets 40 hours of ABA, or everyone who's diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder is eligible for competitive employment or should live in a certain type of housing. We have to recognize that different clusters of symptoms should lead to different baskets of interventions, and that there's a need to really define this group because they have been left behind by DSM-5. I think what we tend to see in the media, on television, is a reflection of autism spectrum disorder that is very high functioning. You know, people talk about autism on The Good Doctor, on The Big Bang Theory, autism on Love on the Spectrum. People are talking about, oh, that's autism. Oh, okay, I understand. Now I understand what autism is, but they don't understand what autism is because they're not seeing the kids who are in their home and the families who are taking care of them, who are in their homes, unable to go out because of concern about how their children will behave, unable to access necessary services, who are struggling with really having their basic needs met. So I think that the commission recognizing this group is incredibly important and will lead to us being able to provide the types of interventions that benefit everyone, and that, as Kathy said, are more personalized and person-centered and focused on their actual needs as opposed to just a one-size-fits-all. Kathy, do you have anything you want to add to my color commentary?
Oh, that was great. I mean, I haven't seen the questions yet. They're probably, I should let people ask questions and then I can answer.
I can, I'm fielding the questions for you and I can ask them as they come in. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. The first one is from one of the clinicians. We would love to hear thoughts about the utility of the term profound ASD versus having comorbid diagnosis of ASD and intellectual disability with the level specified. Can you guys speak about that?
Shall I go, Alison?
Go ahead.
I think part of the reason there are two reasons why we did this. One is that when kids are diagnosed, if they're 2 or 3 or maybe even 4, I think we don't often know the degree to which they have intellectual disability. It will become more apparent as they move from 3 to 4 to 5, but certainly at 2, I would be very leery of saying this is a child who has profound intellectual disability, and even at 3. And so there are kids who have autism, legitimate autism diagnoses, and that's where they start. And later it becomes apparent that they have more significant intellectual disability and also that their language isn't developing at a rate that will allow them to be fluent. So I think that was one point. The second point is that we know there's something called Zipf's law, Z-I-P-F, which is that shorter phrases get used more. And I think, for example, in ICD-11, there's like autism with severe intellectual disability and severe communication disability and autism, but nobody does that. I mean, people do not use these long phrases. And so although we recognize that we are talking for the most part about people who have autism and very significant intellectual disability or communication disorders, it's faster to say profound autism. And it's been hard enough to get people to even acknowledge these kids exist without having like a 5-word phrase that they have to use. So I think that was the logic.
I totally agree. I'll add a third, and that is that the term profound is very clear. When you say profound, people get a picture in their head, not always a complete and accurate picture, but a sense, much in the way that the term Asperger's used to communicate to someone, give them a good sense, a decent sense of when a person walked into your office, what you were likely to confront. I cannot tell you how often now, when I tell a new person who I've just met that my daughter has autism, their expectation is that she's very high functioning, that she is going to present in some way like Sheldon Cooper or one of these characters that you see in fictional television series, because that is what people see. And when I say no, she's, if I use the term profound or severe, that immediately communicates to them what they should expect in terms of her functional level. And I'll also add finally that parents of children who fall into this category are very eager for clinicians and policymakers to understand the plight that their child and that their entire family is experiencing with regards to their child's autism. And this has really been a change in terms of what I've seen over the course of my career. I think parents now they know that there are interventions that are likely to help their kids. They want to make sure they get the right interventions, and they want interventions that are tailored to the unique needs of their children. They don't, I think we've done a good job of saying, let's not wait and see. Let's actually provide meaningful intervention that will result in meaningful outcome. And when parents communicate to clinicians that their children are profound, or that they're embracing the term profound or severe, I think that is just a better, it enables the group, the parents and the clinicians, to work better together towards a common goal because everyone is united in their language.
Thanks. So we have 2 more questions that came in. The first one, they're kind of related. The first one, this group here has gotten a lot of talks by and with self-advocates and neurodiversity, which I'm sure you have as well. The question is, in speaking with autistic self-advocates, many have explained that they find the term, as you well know, profound autism to be ableist, and are offended by it. What the question though is how do we as clinicians, what would your advice be as clinicians when we're confronted with that concern by self-advocates? How would you advise that we respond to that?
So the first, and Kathy, if you don't mind, in the commission report, I think the commissioners were very clear to say that no one should be diagnosed profound autism if they don't want to be diagnosed profound autism, or if their family doesn't want them to be diagnosed profound autism. As Kathy said, it would not be a diagnostic label, it's an administrative label. I would say that in many cases, families do want to have their kids diagnosed profound because, as I said, it communicates a clear cluster of symptoms that could lead to personalized interventions. I think the concern that we have heard from neurodiversity advocates has been, I'll say, a failure to understand that what we're saying is not that the needs of people with profound autism are more important and that they should get all of the resources. We're just saying that the needs are different, and that people whose autism doesn't fall into the category of profound certainly have the right, and we have an ethical responsibility to provide them with supports and services, but that those supports and services are different, and that the purpose of the term profound is to communicate that they would be different supports and services. Like my daughter, who would be diagnosed profound autism, is not a candidate for supported competitive employment. So when people talk to me about, oh, she should be independent, she should have competitive employment, she should live independently, that is not a goal for her. And I refuse to accept that her life is meaningless because she's not going to achieve independent employment. I think that's become ridiculous. And so I think it's critical for us as families to be able to communicate to clinicians and policymakers that the be all and end all goal for people with autism is not always independence, right? My daughter works, she lives with peers, she has a job that she enjoys, she has a very meaningful day. My husband tells everyone that she's probably the happiest person in our family because she is doing what she loves. She raises animals, she's loved animals from the time she was a little girl. But she has very different needs than the needs of someone who's diagnosed with autism, who graduated from Stanford Business School and is, working for Google. But I think that I have tried personally to talk to a lot of neurodiversity advocates about this issue, and that we are absolutely in no way saying that people with higher functioning autism don't have very significant needs and that those needs should not be met. The sole purpose of really having this term profound autism is to communicate the difference in needs, the dichotomy of needs, and that as a society, we need to be planning for all of those different paths.
I think I would just second. I mean, I think when you start labeling people, like you say, well, that's not ableist and we should all be, or that is ableist. I think you're setting yourself up to saying, I know what a person is. And I know only if someone has the same values as me, are they as good as me? And I think back to Alison's point, I think people with profound autism can be happy. We want them to be able to make as many choices for themselves as they can. And we want them to have good lives. And that is not ableist to say that they need more help. It's like saying, an amputee can't have a prosthetic because that is ableist. I mean, I guess I have been more struck by some of the reactions of some of the people, not all by any means, of the autism self-advocates. I mean, we had 3 people on the committee and we've had a host of other people chime in. And I think there are other people that are able to understand this perspective, but the people who feel like only their perspective is appropriate, I think that's really wrong. And that's part of our concern is we want just people to take a moment to say, wait a minute, there's a population here that maybe I don't know that much about. And I need to listen to people who know about them. And if they could speak for themselves, they would, but mostly they can't. And so we need to listen to their parents and the people that work with them to find out what to do better.
If I may, most of the comments that are coming into and people who talk agree completely with this notion of acknowledging the need and the lack of voice. I had an interesting conversation with a self-advocate who articulated, and the problem this person had with the term wasn't the recognition of the profundity of need. It was more having to do with semantics. And that's what he was relating to the ableist language, meaning, and he had a great example, which I still remind, he's like, if you were a Black male, and I consider myself an autistic male, you wouldn't say that I have profound Blackness. So it is this, meaning like it's a matter of identity, meaning like if autism isn't something I have, it's something I am. I can't be profoundly something I am, was his point with it. And it related more to the identity piece that the advocates are not with the, like, oh, I have autism, how profound is my autism? It's like, no, I am autistic. I'm not profoundly a male. I'm not profoundly, whatever. So I thought it was interesting.
That is interesting, but yeah. I think we're caught, and all of us, because we're clinicians, we're seeing people who want help. So I think that is who I see. And that is my experience of autism, is working with families and adults and children and adolescents who need help. And not everybody with autism needs help. But again, it's sort of like, I don't know, there's a lot of conditions. I used to have red hair and I got sunburned. It's not the same as autistic, but it's still, I had a condition, but sometimes it mattered and sometimes it doesn't. And that's probably, that person is making the point that they would like to have that just be pure. pure identity. It's not, unfortunately, pure identity. It's a medical term that results in you being able to have access to support. And that's probably where we're coming from, which is hard for them. So, I mean, maybe we need a different term to describe somebody who, they can have autism and something else that's their identity.
I would add that the ability to come up with a complex idea like that is itself a defining characteristic of not being profoundly autistic. I don't think my daughter would ever be splitting hairs over whether she wanted to be diagnosed profound autism or not. I don't think she understands that she has autism or whether she's autistic or diagnosed with autism. She is who she is, right? She is a very loving, sweet, happy girl. She's able to take care of animals. She enjoys farming. She likes to pick apples. I mean, she's a farmer and she works on a farm and she has a very meaningful day. And I find it very ableist for people who are diagnosed with very high functioning autism to say that her day is not meaningful because they would not choose to live and work on a farm.
We have about, thank you, I appreciate that viewpoint in the response. We have about maybe 5 or 6 minutes, and this other question, it's a couple questions are revolving around the same notion, which love to hear your input on, which has to do with conveying that diagnosis to parents. So like one of them says, I completely agree with the term, helps differentiate. However, how do you advise it from a parental perspective, how it might feel upon the initial diagnosis? Would it scare the parents? We're worried about the phrase might conjure in a person's head. People will write them off and not get to know them. So you want to react to those two questions?
Alison, you start and then I'll.
Let me start by saying that when you have a child who would be eligible to be diagnosed profound, it's not a surprise to you when they get that diagnosis. I think, what we've heard from parents is sort of disappointment when they look back and that they weren't told right away that their child had autism. And I would fall into this category. Jody was originally diagnosed PDD NOS. And when I went back a few years later and asked the neurologist, why was she diagnosed PDD NOS? It was clear from these reports that she had autism. They don't give that diagnosis because they're concerned about how the parents will react. I think in many cases, what you're doing by not giving the accurate term is not arming the parent with the information they need to go out and get the kinds of services and supports that their child is going to need. I think, and I'll give I understand from the clinician's point of view that they don't want to give bad news because we as parents, we behave badly when we get that kind of information. We yell, we scream. I was very guilty of this. The first person who told me they thought my daughter might be autistic was her nursery school teacher. And I did not react well at all. I used words that no one should use in a nursery school environment. And my behavior was terrible. But by using the word autism, when even the neurologist didn't use the word autism, it set me on a path to be able to get the services and supports that my daughter needed. And even though I yelled at the teacher at the time, 2 years later, I went back to that nursery school with a big platter of bagels and cream cheese to say thank you because of what that teacher did for my family. So I would urge, all of you as clinicians, be upfront with the families. We may react badly at first, but we will come back in 2 years and we will thank you, because by giving us the right vocabulary and by telling us the truth, by giving us your honest assessment, you are helping us to put our child on the right path.
And I would just add, I think as an assessment person, I think we need to know cognitive levels. We need to not overstate them when kids are little, but families should know what we see, and we need to repeat those assessments so we can say, wait a minute, I met you when your child was 3. I thought she was functioning at about a 12-month level, but that, we need to see what's going to happen. Now she's 4, she's functioning at a 15-month level. This is slow progress. And so we need to see what's going to happen. And now she's 5 and she's functioning at an 18-month level. And this is This is a very significant delay. And so I don't know that I would say I wouldn't say she's got profound autism now. What I would say, we need to be thinking about the degree to which this delay is affecting her as much as the autism, because what we're going to teach in terms of skills needs to match what she's able to learn to do. And she can learn things, but if we're teaching her at a 5-year-old level, she's not going to learn anything. And so but also the fact that a delay, I mean, families often think, obviously, you know, if I have a 3-year-old and she's functioning at a 1-year-old, well, when she's 38, it won't matter that she's like a 36-year-old. But I think the only way that can be done is by repeated assessments, and not, I mean, we don't need to keep doing IQ tests infinitely. At some point it becomes ridiculous. But I think for young kids, for families to be able to monitor progress and have some understanding of that, I think is really, really important.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking at the time. It's 11:58. We probably don't, there's many more questions coming in that we don't have time to answer. So what I'll offer the group is, Melanie, you can help me with this too. If we can like copy these questions down that are in chat, and then we'll put them on our listserv. And if Alison or Kathy have time to answer them, they're really good questions. We can try to get to them as well. Because again, we could have this conversation, I think, all day long. But I wanted to, again, put my appreciation out there for both of you taking the time to answer the question. It's a potentially controversial area. You guys are brave to do this and to put your thoughts out there and lead the country moving forward with this. I just love the fact that we have both the parent perspective and the clinician perspective too. I mean, that's so important, especially for most of us as clinicians, to be aware of the parent side. And you are the voice, right, for those who have profound autism and can't speak for themselves. So that has to be honored and recognized as well. So again, for everyone here, thank you so much for presenting to our group. These will be slides will be put up. This entire recording will be put up on the IDEA website, and we'll go ahead and use the listserv to maybe continue the conversation and ask questions. And we'll see everybody again next month for our next IDEA webinar. Thank you so much, Kathy and Alison. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
Bye-bye.